Recently, I made a video airing very honestly some frustrations I've been having with myself and with creating things in general. And a lot of the people that watched that video seemed to resonate with my desire for just creating a good thing to be enough. Sadly, it's not. At least not a success is the numbers on my analytics page going up. But I think in making that video, I kind of inadvertently pointed myself in the right direction to where I'm most at home and comfortable, speaking intimately about media that has affected me and sharing it with you. This is me giving that a shot again. This is my attempt at making good stuff, regardless of how well it performs. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Davey Wreden's game, The Beginner's Guide. Before I get started, I would like to implore you, particularly if you are a creative person in any way, the kind of person that derives joy from making things, this game is $10 and will only take you about an hour and a half to beat. It is well worth the price of admission, and rather than just taking my interpretation at face value, I feel you would be best served to play it for yourself and then return to this video. If you've already played the game or just don't care that much, that's totally fine, but I wanted to make sure I thoroughly warned you because there will be full spoilers in this video, and I don't want to rob anyone of an experience.
Hi there. Thank you very much for playing The Beginner's Guide. My name is Davey Wreden. I wrote The Stanley Parable, and while that game tells a pretty absurd story, today I'm going to tell you about a series of events that happened between 2008 and 2011.
One of the first games I purchased on Steam when I made my account 11 years ago at this point was a little indie game with a funny British narrator called The Stanley Parable. To this day, that is easily one of my all-time favorite games. It's one of the pieces of media that inspired me to pursue a college education in writing, so needless to say, when I first heard who made this game, I didn't need any more convincing to play it. I remember initially hearing about it from Joseph Anderson in one of his videos that I can't find anymore, and PirateSoftware, who is absolutely exploding on YouTube recently, recommends the game as a push in the right direction for artists that are struggling with any aspect of the creative process, and I have had multiple friends personally recommend this game to me. I played it at 3 a.m. last night, and to say that it was frustratingly poignant for what I've been encountering as a creator lately would be putting it mildly. The Beginner's Guide is an ongoing conversation where Davey is going to walk us through the short games created by his friend Coda, who no longer makes games. His hope is that by sharing these games and the story accompanying them, that he can convince Coda that creating games is worth returning to. Davey wants to help his friend.
At one point, he jokingly renamed his computer's recycling bin to Important Games Folder. So, this was just how he worked. He tended to crank them out one after the other without even really pausing to try to understand what he had just made, until suddenly one day, he just stopped. As each game is loading, I'll show you the date that it was completed. This first one was made in November 2008.
The first game that Davey shows us is a first-person shooter with no enemies and no reload button. Once you run out of ammo, you're done shooting. There's a maze in this game that Davey skips us past, and at the end of the game, a voice kicks in on the speaker, begging you to sacrifice yourself to the beam in front of you to save everyone. In the event that the game works, you jump into the beam and die, saving everyone on the ship. But that's not what originally happened, because there was a bug in the code the first time Coda put the game together. I'll let Davey explain.
Let me pause here for a second. What you just experienced, stepping into the beam and then dying, is probably what Coda had initially intended when he was developing this level. But when he first compiles and plays it, something goes wrong. There's a bug somewhere. And this is what happens instead. The beam causes you to start floating. And this is an important moment for him. Because yes, this is technically a glitch, but Coda identifies something human about it, like how small it makes you feel in the face of this larger chaotic system. Or this floating could be the afterlife, a peaceful place, juxtaposed against all of the hysteria that you've just had to traverse. I don't even know. I have no idea what he was thinking, but what's clear is that after making this, something lodges itself in his brain. He wants to do more of these really weird and experimental designs. So he stops work on this and moves on to a stream of tiny little games that go in all sorts of directions. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first game he made after leaving this one behind. Yep, in this game you can only walk backwards.
There's some messaging on the wall, and you walk through the environment reading it. I won't read it out to you because on the off chance you decide at some point in this video to play the game, I want to give you as much of an opportunity to experience it fresh as I can. This game is short, and Davey likes this. He thinks it works because the game gets out quick. The game immediately following this is a short walk in the dark, where you encounter a sign that says, "You are now entering." And then it ends. Sometimes a rock is just a rock. In this next game, you walk up a set of stairs and get slowed down to a pace so slow that it would take forever to reach the door at the top of the stairs. Davey allows us to skip this process by speeding us back up, and we enter a room filled to the brim with Coda's ideas. This felt very personal to me, private. Like a room that I wasn't supposed to see or be standing in. I mean, we had cheated the game's mechanics to get here. It felt like a room that maybe even Davey himself wasn't supposed to be standing in. The next game Davey gives us is a short game with a puzzle. You open a door, shut it as you walk in, and turn around to find the switch to open the next door on the one you just closed. There's not much more to this game, at least not that you can normally see. Here, Davey removes the walls for us to reveal that Coda was hiding a massive expanse of inaccessible parts of the game beyond the walls.
Don't forget that solution, because we're going to see this puzzle again soon. We're gonna see it a lot. So that seems to be it, right? You walk down a corridor, you solve a puzzle, you get to the end. Simple enough. All right. Now I'm going to modify the game again so that when you press enter, it'll remove all of the walls from this room. How about that? There was more to it than we had any way of knowing.
Moving on, the next game is like the first short walk, but you encounter a sign that says "You are now exiting," and then it ends. Again, sometimes a rock is just a rock. The next game is a short walk through a surreal environment that ends in a prison. Coda has the player enter a prison cell, and according to Davey's narration, the game would take an entire hour before letting you out to progress. And he talks here a bit about how he and Coda used to argue about whether or not games should be playable. Davey argues that all that work should be experienced by players, and Coda takes the opposite stance. That meaning is something you can derive from a thing or not. I found this little tidbit kind of funny.
Inaccessible. And so we just got into heated arguments over it, and there was one time that after one of these conversations, he went home, and a day or two later, he sent me a zip file entitled Playable Games that was full of hundreds of individual games, each of which was just an empty box that you walked around in and nothing else. Believe me, I played every single one of those just to find out if there was like a gag hidden somewhere. There wasn't.
You continue through the game and have a conversation with these characters using the chat system in the source engine, which is what all these games were made in. Then you reach the end. I'll let Davey talk here. Listen closely to this part because the wording here is important.
It's a lamppost. Okay, I can't tell you quite why, but for some reason Coda fixates on this lamppost. It's going to appear at the end of every single one of his games from here on out. I'll tell you what I think. I think that up to this point, he's been making really strange and abstract games with no clear purpose, and maybe you can only float around in that headspace for so long. Because now he wants something to hold on to. He wants a reference point. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination. We're going to see it in the work as well. His games are just going to become a lot more cohesive, a lot more fully developed, with more of a clear idea behind them. And as we go, that idea will get clearer and clearer and clearer.
Coda's next game was a bit of a weird one. In the title, it states that it is connected to the internet and you can leave messages, just like the Dark Souls games, because every game is Dark Souls. The game isn't connected to the internet, and all of the messages left in this game were written by Coda. Davey sees these messages as increasingly lonely and feels that at this point in time, Coda was pulling back from other people. The ending of this game is a bit terrifying. The next game that Coda makes is actually a set of games that Davey shows us. It's a set of prototypes of another game that puts the player in prison. Some of them are silly, like this one that teaches you how to escape a prison by touching objects in order, starting with a couch, and then the couch isn't there when it comes time to actually escape the prison. Davey feels that all of these prison games are Coda beating their head against the wall because Coda doesn't have that voice in their head that lets them move on from an idea. The final prison game in this series is one where the player talks with a past version of themselves that is still stuck in the prison. You talk to yourself in a phone booth next to that same lamppost, and the way that the player helps their past self escape the prison is simply being honest. I like that message.
I can see why he considers this a fitting conclusion to the prison games. After all of the obsession and frustration, just to be told by someone you can trust that things are going to be okay. Wouldn't that be nice?
This next one is my personal favorite game that Coda made. You walk up this snowy hill into a little house where a cleaner has you help them tidy up the house. You chat with them here and there, but mostly you just walk around the house repeating the task of tidying it up. It's simple, but I like it, and the music here is great. This game ended really abruptly. It felt weird to me. It didn't seem like a Coda transition, at least not from what we've seen so far of their design. Coda isn't particularly keen on ending things cleanly, so it felt to me, more so than when Davey altered earlier games to allow us to play, that Davey was the one ending the game here for us.
I know that Coda really liked this game. Of all of his work, actually, this was the only one that he called me up to ask me to come over and look at it. This was during a period of a few months where he was like grossly happy all the time, just walked around with a constant smile on his face. I'm glad he made this. I'm glad he found some peace. But, of course, it can't last. The music stops, your companion is gone, it's time to leave. The door at the top of the hill is now open as well. Again, you can't stay in the dark space for too long. You just can't. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive.
We walk up the hill, see another lamppost, and then it's time to move on to the next game.
This one gets a bit goofy.
Davey shows us Coda's next game, which was a short vignette about a teacher and a student, where you switch perspective halfway through the game to become the teacher and realize that they are incapable of speaking the truth and only capable of saying things that project a good image. A black hole slowly approaches the classroom from the back, and try as they might, they can't warn anyone, so they just watch.
This one took a lot longer than all the others for Coda to make. It was 4 months between this and the last one. That's twice as long as it took him to make any other game before this, and it's not like it's particularly complex, so I remember I found that a little strange at the time.
Here in this game, you roleplay as Coda. They're at a gathering of professionals and they are attempting to talk to someone that they admire a lot. The lights on the stage are harsh, and everything you try to say to the woman that Coda was trying to talk to is deemed wrong by Coda. They decided to represent the other people at this gathering as these cones that quite literally bounce you away if you get close. And after failing enough to talk to the woman, Coda sends the player off the stage, further and further back, with cages closing them into the dark. I'll let Davey talk here.
The game ends with this eerie premonition of what's going to happen next in Coda's life. The solution to social anxiety, to fears of having to perform and having to chase success, the answer for Coda is to withdraw, to hide himself away. Which is what leads to scenarios like the stairs that slowed you down several games ago, where it just becomes harder and harder to access Coda's inner landscape because he keeps retreating. He just keeps backing away from possible connections to anyone other than himself. And to be honest, I didn't consider it very healthy when I first played this game. You know, it looked to me like he was trying to justify the idea of just disconnecting yourself from the world. And that wasn't what I wanted for him or for his games. Because I feel like a lot of his games are inviting me to connect with this person, to bring him closer. But what can you do? After this, Coda went off and took another 5 months to make a new game.
This next game you're supposed to play with your eyes closed. I lasted about 10 seconds before I opened my eyes. There is a room rapidly approaching your spaceship that will crash into you and kill everyone if you don't do something about it. The solution to this problem is to speak the truth, which Coda defines as admitting that they don't find game development that fun anymore. That it's draining and they don't have the energy for it. The spark just isn't there anymore. Admitting these things stops the room from crashing into you, and the game ends. Davey is worried Coda is retreating more and more at this point in time, and really thinks he has to do something to help them. 6 months pass between this game and the next one. This time around, the player is having a conversation with an ephemeral entity, saying things that portray the same sentiment as in the last game. That the spark is gone and the fire is just not there anymore. Whatever was working just isn't now. The player encounters a wall, and only by lying to this wall, saying that creating games is great and going well, does the wall break down. At the end, there is a woman in a prison crying. Davey felt very uncomfortable with this game.
For him to suddenly become angry and frustrated like this, it was the worst thing for me. I don't know. This is what I felt at the time. I don't know how else to explain it. I wanted it to stop more than anything. I had never felt so rotten. I needed more than I had ever needed anything for this to stop.
Here, you interrogate a machine named Coda. No matter how much the player character tries to talk to the machine will not apologize to the player for stopping creating games. You walk outside and announce this lack of remorse to the press waiting outside, and then you go and destroy everything Coda has ever created. The game ends with you shooting the machine named Coda. This is when Davey says something that made me feel uncomfortable.
So now the work is becoming self-destructive. And I'll tell you, at the time that I first played this game, shortly after he made it, here's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm thinking that Code is stuck in his own head, and that it's having a very negative effect on him, and that all he needs to do is just start showing his work to people, to get some actual feedback on his games. It might get him out of isolation. And so, as I'm thinking this, I realize that I could be the one to initiate it. Because it would never occur to Coda to start actively soliciting feedback, so what if I did it for him? If he could see the difference it would make to have more actual conversations with other human beings, would that bring him out of his mental spiral? Would it give him confidence in himself? Would it bring meaning back into his work? So I started showing Coda's work to people. I took this one, and the islands which you just played, the theater, the notes, the house cleaning game, and some of the prison escape games. I brought them to people that I knew and trusted. I asked their opinions. And the great part is that they really loved his games. You know, the point of it all was just to give him some external reference point, but they genuinely loved his work. There was nothing for him to be afraid of.
Davey admits that he took Coda's games without their permission and started sharing them with their mutual colleagues. He describes feeling joy himself when other people liked Coda's games. If I had shared my writing or work with someone who then passed it along to be given feedback by people I don't know without my permission, I'd be very upset. It kinda dawned on me here that down the road, I am currently a part of the process that Davey is describing here on a bigger scale. Everyone that has played these games or witnessed them has taken part in it. The thought alone made me squirm in my seat a little bit. The gap between the last game and the one prior to it was 7 months. The gap between that same game and this next one was only a month. This is the last game that, to Davey's knowledge, Coda ever made.
And this is where I have trouble saying anything meaningful about Coda's work. Because more than anything else, the tower just feels distant. It feels like it's trying to distance itself from the world. It's a very cold game.
There is a maze at the start that buzzes and flashes aggressively when you hit its invisible walls, and Davey makes this remark.
Every time you touch one of the walls, there's this awful flashing and noise, so the experience is really miserable. The game goes beyond not being meant to be played, it actually seems to despise the player for trying to play it at all.
We don't know it yet, but Davey knows fully well, because this game was the only game that Coda made specifically for Davey. This was just for him. I'm gonna pull a Davey here and skip us ahead a bit. This final game is called The Tower, and at the top of the tower, we find this.
Where did I screw up?
I'm the reason that you stopped making games, aren't I? It's because of what I did. I poisoned it for you. I don't think I ever told you this, but when I took your work and I was showing it to people, it actually felt... it felt as though I were responsible for something important and valuable. And the people who played them, they treated me like I was important. They really listened and cared about what I had to say. Even though I was showing your work, I felt good about myself. Finally, for a moment, while I had that, I liked myself.
The lampposts that Davey said were something Coda was fixated on felt the need to include in every game they made. That was Davey's obsession this entire time. When he shared Coda's games without their permission, he was ruining it for Coda. And even before he shared the games, he altered them to feel like he was a part of them. He admitted it himself that it made him feel important.
They treated me like I was important.
The maze at the start of this game does hate the player because the player is Davey and only Davey. We have yet again been thrust in the middle of something of Coda's creation by Davey that wasn't meant for our eyes. Davey can't help himself. He's incapable of stopping himself from doing the very thing that drove Coda to stop creating games in the first place. Davey took Coda's creations and warped them, repeatedly adding the lamppost to every single game to try and manufacture meaning in a thing that had no meaning. Sometimes a rock is just a rock. The fact of the matter is that Davey warps everything Coda makes. He consumes it as an audience and then bastardizes it, playing it off as his own in his head. Even with the maze, as the veil starts to fade and we see Davey for who he really is and what he has really been doing to Coda's games, the way in which he alters these games to be playable for us feels different. He isn't just skipping us ahead anymore like he was before, he is actively changing the function of the game. Adding a bridge here, spray painting the code to a puzzle on the ground. He is leaving his mark on it because sharing Coda's game isn't the only important part of this for Davey. As creators and creatives, we all have to give enough of ourselves to the things that we make so that you, the audience, want to consume it. But we also have to take care and not give so much of ourselves that you want to consume us too. When it comes to Davey's relationship to Coda, there was no way Coda could engage in it safely. Even with a game that Coda made specifically for themselves to endlessly clean a house with no intended meaning for anyone but themselves. I mean, at the top of the tower, Coda admits it, that at some point they started to realize that they were also making the games with Davey in mind. This one, in the middle of the winter, feels like it was goading Davey. Go ahead, you sick fuck. Find something meant for you in this game. I fucking dare you.
You can't stay in the dark space for too long. You just can't. You have to keep moving. It's how you stay alive.
Where there is nothing for Davey, he simply perverts the thing until it works for him. He mentions it very casually later, but the cleaning level, Coda's cleaning level, never actually ended.
Like the house cleaning game. You know, that one used to actually loop the cleaning chores and you just cleaned a house forever. I had to cut it off so that you could exit the house and the game would actually end.
You would just clean forever in an endless loop with this comfortable music in the background. My feeling earlier was right. This level's ending is entirely Davey's creation.
Sooner or later, you have to pick up and move. I really thought that was the point of it.
Obviously, the example of Davey and Coda is an extreme example of this, but we all engage in this same behavior all the time. It's the English teacher you had in the 5th grade telling you that the blue jeans in the book are meant to represent internal conflict, and the torn up overalls at the end of the book are meant to represent acceptance. Some interpretations like this can be right, but the way that we engage with art, with film, books, videos, music, anything, we as humans always try and glean something from it. Early on in one of the games, there was this weird design flourish of 3 dots on the side of a wall that I kind of raised an eyebrow at as I walked by, but I didn't think too hard about it. They're out of place and stand out, but Davey didn't mention it at the time, so I ignored it. But as he's having his panic attack, confessing his sins to the player at the end of the game and pleading to Coda to make games again, he mentions it because he's obsessed with it.
I asked him so many times to please just tell me what his games mean to him. I asked him please to tell me what the 3 dots mean. And he wouldn't.
Even if there is none, he has the intense desire to derive some meaning from every bit of Coda's games, down to a weird little creative flourish like 3 dots on a wall. Davey felt like adding a consistent element like the lamppost would help him find some meaning. But when it comes to the one thing Coda really does leave in there for every one of their games, Davey is clueless to the meaning of it, or even if there is meaning to it. And it drives him crazy. The Beginner's Guide brought to light a realization about myself that kind of scared me more than anything else I've talked about so far. In the digital age, it is much more difficult to hide certain things, and for lack of a better term, the curtain has been pulled back on content creation at large. Most of the shit you see on the internet is scripted, fake, disingenuous, and staged. There's entire content farms dedicated to giving people brain tingles in just the way that they prefer. There are family content creators exploiting themselves and their children, faking happy relationships where struggles never appear to make people who feel like they should be in the same place as that family in the video feel a moment of joy. It's all smoke and mirrors. There was a film festival a while ago that I attended all about hiking and people following trails. Paths set before them by hundreds and hundreds of boots that took the same path to get to the same place, but with a different cadence in their footsteps and a different tread on their boots. Many of the short films really held a lot of gorgeous sentiments about human nature and the paths we walk on, and having a mindfulness about that. One film in particular was about a man that was separated from his family in Japan during the pandemic. He was isolated, and to deal with this isolation, he hiked the trails of Japan to visit shrines around the country to pass the time until the quarantine was lifted and he could see his family again. There were no spoken words in the film, and it had some beautiful shots of the country, but about halfway through the film, it clicked for me. A lot of the shots were from the top of paths or further down a path with the man walking towards the camera. The whole point of the film was that he was alone, so either he was lying about that and had someone setting up the camera for him, or even more embarrassingly, he had to hike up a hill, place the camera, go back down the hill, and then cinematically walk right back up the hill, hoping that the shot was good. And then he'd have to repeat the process if it wasn't any good. The feelings that the film evoked were manufactured, and all content is manufactured, but that's when it really punched me in the mouth. All content is designed to make us feel things and do things and buy things, and the scary realization that I had is that I'm not so sure that I care. That's not to suggest that I'm apathetic in any way, but as someone who also creates things, various forms and various in their purpose, I kinda appreciate the craftsmanship behind some of it. What is the point in being annoyed with the hiker who dedicated himself to walking up and down those hills until he had the absolute perfect shot to go into his film about how he missed his family that he wanted to share with us? If a piece of media made you feel a certain way, is it that bad to be a little impressed by it? Is it bad if it works? In a good way, in the best way. With a smile, man. Who gives a shit? How you got to an emotional conclusion or resolution doesn't change the fact that you did get there, in the meaning that you got from an experience, or this game, or this video. Or maybe you got nothing from it. Maybe the 3 dots don't mean anything at all. Maybe a rock is just a rock. That's for you to decide. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please do check out my other recent content. A lot of it is quite different in vibes from this video, but it's still quite good. And I hope to make more content like this in the near future. Also, if this video goes out around when I hope to be done with it, Merry Christmas if you celebrate, and Happy Holidays if you don't.